22, I'm 30. The English girl I dated at 18 found me after my wife died. The knock came at 9:47 at night. I remember because the kitchen clock was the only sound in the house. That and the kettle still ticking from the willow bark tea I'd made for myself. The one Rebecca used to make for me when my back went bad after threshing. I wasn't expecting anyone. A widower at 30 doesn't get late knocks. Not in our valley, not on a Tuesday. I opened the door, and there she was, standing in the porch light with the moths going crazy around her head. English clothes, a car behind her with the engine still warm. I could smell it. She said my name like she'd been practicing it for 12 years. Joseph, and my hands. I need you to understand. My hands had just spent the afternoon stripping comfrey leaves for a poultice. They still smelled green. They still had that sticky feeling on the thumbs. And now they were holding the door open for a girl I'd kissed once, behind the feed store in Lancaster County, the summer before I knelt for the church. She said, "I heard about Rebecca. I'm so sorry. I didn't know where else to go." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My jaw locked up, the same way it did the night Rebecca's fever broke for the last time. I was 18 the first time I met her. I am 30 now, and the tea on the stove was still steeping. Quick pause. My name is Joseph. And this is, if these stories stay with you, if they remind you of something the old ones knew, subscribe. It's free, and it's the reason I can keep telling them. Tell me in the comments, what's the one remedy your mother or grandmother made that you'd give anything to taste again? And if you want to go further, a super chat or a membership, that's you telling me these old ways are worth remembering. That keeps this going. Now, back to what happened. In our community, you don't call the English doctor first. That's not a rule somebody wrote down. Nobody sat me on a bench and said it. I just watched it. I watched my dad go to the Braucher when my brother Eli got the croup so bad his lips went blue. I watched my gross daddy boil mullein leaves on the stove for 3 nights straight when Ma'am couldn't breathe right that one winter. The hospital was the last place. Not the first, the last. And by the time you got there, in our way of thinking, you'd already failed the old ways. That's what Dat used to say plain. The land gives us what we need. We just have to know where to look. And it lived in the small things, too, not just the emergencies. A bee sting on a child's hand, plantain leaf, chewed by whoever was closest, pressed on warm. A cough at bedtime, onion sliced thin, layered with raw honey in a mason jar, the syrup spooned out by morning. Burns from the wood stove. Fresh aloe and a prayer the Braucher taught my grandmother that I'm not allowed to say out loud, even now. Nobody taught me any of it. I just saw it done 1,000 times before I was tall enough to reach the second shelf where the brown bottles lived, and I never questioned it, not once. Because in our valley, the men who questioned were the men whose wives didn't last the winter. Rebecca came to me through my uncle. Her name was Rebecca Yoder before it was Rebecca Lapp. She was 22 when I married her. I was 24. We'd known each other our whole lives. She'd been the quiet one at the singings, the one who never laughed too loud, the one who could already make a comfrey salve at 16 that smelled cleaner than anything her mother made. Her hands were the first thing I loved. I should say that. They were small and red from the lye soap, and they always smelled faintly like beeswax. Always. She was a healer. I don't mean officially. We don't have officially. But the women in our church came to her for the things they wouldn't say to their husbands. Cramping, bleeding, the babies that didn't come, the babies that came and didn't stay. She kept a row of bottles on the windowsill above the sink, tinctures she'd made herself, labeled in her tight little handwriting, black cohosh, red raspberry leaf, shepherd's purse, yarrow. I never asked what they were for. A husband doesn't in our way. He just keeps the wood stove going and the lamp filled. The cough started in October. I want to say October. No, it was late September, right after we'd brought in the last of the field corn. She made herself a tea of mullein and thyme and a little honey, and she said it was nothing. She said it 3 times in 2 days, which now, looking back, was the thing I should have heard. Rebecca didn't repeat herself, not about her own body. By the time the leaves were down, she was coughing into her apron at night so I wouldn't hear it. I heard it anyway. The kitchen the night it got bad, I can still smell it. The cast iron pot on the back of the stove with the onion syrup going. The kerosene lamp on the table, hissing the way it did when the wick needed trimming. The window above the sink fogged over from the steam. She was sitting in the rocking chair my dad made us for the wedding, and her shoulders were doing this small shake every few seconds, and she was trying to hide it by pretending to read her German Bible. I knew she wasn't reading. The page hadn't turned in 40 minutes. I'd been counting. That's what you do when you can't help. You count things. I went to the cellar and brought up the brown bottle of lobelia tincture her mother had made the spring before she passed. 7 drops in warm water. That's what the old ones knew for a chest that wouldn't loosen. I measured them out on the table with my hands shaking just enough that the 7th drop hit the rim of the cup instead of the water, and I had to wipe it with my thumb. Rebecca watched me. She didn't say anything. She just held out her hand for the cup. Her wedding ring was loose on her finger. It hadn't been loose in August. I noticed that. I didn't say it. She drank it. She breathed in the steam from the onion pot. She let me put a warm, comfy poultice across her chest. I'd made it the way her own mother taught me, with the leaves wilted just so over the kettle, wrapped in muslin, the kind of warm where you test it on the inside of your wrist first. For about an hour, she breathed easier. She smiled at me. She said, "Joseph, you're a better healer than you let on." And I felt like a man who had done something right for once. I felt like maybe the old ways were going to hold her. Maybe my hands knew enough. Maybe. And then around 2 in the morning, she started shaking. Not coughing, shaking. Her skin went hot in a way I'd never felt on a person before, like touching a stove through a dish rag. I tried garlic on the soles of her feet, wrapped in cotton, the way Grossdaddy did for fever. I tried apple cider vinegar in cool water on her forehead. I prayed the way we pray, which is quiet, and inside, and without any fancy words. She kept saying she was cold. She was burning, and she kept saying she was cold. And somewhere around 4 in the morning, my hand on her wrist couldn't find what it was supposed to find anymore. I'm not going to describe what came next. Some things a man keeps. I sat with her until first light. Then I walked out to the back fence post, and I stood there until the sun came up over the silo. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just stood there, and the wind was doing nothing, and the only sound was a single mourning dove somewhere down by the spring house. I remember thinking, very clearly, the comfrey is still on her chest. I should go take the comfrey off. What I didn't know, what neither of us knew, was that what Rebecca had wasn't a cough. It was pneumonia that had already moved into both lungs by the time she let me see it. The lobelia, the comfrey, the onion syrup, those were good things, real things, things that have eased real suffering in our valley for 200 years. But they were not the things she needed at 3 o'clock that morning. She needed something the English have and a little bag with a needle on the end of it. And in our way of thinking, by the time you know that, you're already past it. That's the cultural logic. That's the rule that nobody writes down. You don't go first, you go last. And sometimes last is too late. Her mother knew. I think her mother knew. I think Rebecca's mother had buried a sister to the same thing in 1971 and never said it out loud to anybody. Because in our community, a woman doesn't tell another woman's husband what to do for his wife. Dat wasn't a hard man. I need you to understand that. None of them were hard. They just did what their fathers did. None of us knew different. And the thing I learned 6 months later, from a nurse in town who didn't know me, she didn't know me at all, was that what Rebecca had, if we'd gone in even 12 hours sooner, was the kind of thing where they hand you back your wife in 3 days with a paper bag of pills. 12 hours. That's what I carry. That's what I carried right up to the night the knock came on my door. The first year I kept her bottles, all of them. I didn't move a single one off the windowsill above the sink. The black cohosh, the red raspberry leaf, the shepherd's purse. I dusted them every Saturday the way she used to, with a dry rag, lifting each one and setting it back in the exact same spot. The bishop's wife came by once and gently suggested I might want to put them away. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't think about it. That's what the old ones knew about grief. You don't move the dead person's things until your hands stop reaching for them on their own. My hands hadn't stopped. And there's a dry kind of humor in being a healer's husband who kept making her teas for himself, like maybe she'd come through the door and ask how the yarrow was holding up. She didn't. The yarrow held up fine. I built a routine around it. Wake at 4:30, coffee on the wood stove, out to the barn to feed the 2 driving horses and the milk cow. Back in by 6 for breakfast I mostly didn't eat, and every night before bed 1 cup of the willow bark tea Rebecca used to make for my back. Not because my back hurt, because the smell of it filled the kitchen the way she used to. That was the system. A man builds a system around what he can't carry directly. It was at the barn raising for my cousin Amos the following spring that I learned I wasn't the only one. We were eating on the long tables under the maples. The women had laid out cold ham and potato salad and 4 kinds of pie. And I ended up sitting next to my Uncle Levi. Levi is 68, 69 I think. He doesn't talk much. He buried his first wife in 1986. I'd never asked him about it. A nephew doesn't. But that afternoon he looked at me over his coffee and he said, very quiet, "Joseph, the lobelia." That was all. Just those 3 words. And I understood every part of what he meant. He told me, in pieces, between the second piece of pie and the men going back up on the roof. His Anna had been 26. She'd had something inside her. He never knew the English word for it, and I won't guess. He'd done what his father told him. Mullein, garlic, prayer, the Braucher 3 times in 1 week. By the time they hitched the buggy for town, she was already gone in the back of it. He said, I held her hand the whole way. I kept telling her the doctor was just up the road. 7 words. He didn't say any more. He just nodded at me once, the way old men do when they've handed you something they can't carry alone anymore, and he went back up the ladder. 4 winters later, at a woodshop gathering, my neighbor Jonas told me almost the same story about his little girl Mary, who'd been 3 years old. The fever took her in a single night, and Jonas still kept the brown bottle of her tincture on the shelf above his lathe, the way I kept Rebecca's bottles on the sill. By the time I was 30, I knew of 7 men in our valley carrying the same shape of stone in the same pocket. 7. The word I needed came from a book, a small one. I want to be careful here. I'm not saying the book changed my faith. It didn't. It just gave me language. It was on the counter at the feed store in town, of all places, sitting next to the register, a paperback about old country medicine. The English woman who ran the register saw me looking at it and she said, "Take it. Somebody left it. Nobody's come back for it." So I took it, and that night, by the kerosene lamp at my own kitchen table, I read a sentence about pneumonia and what it does in the lungs and how fast it moves in young women whose immune systems are already worn thin from hard winters and hard work. And I had to put the book down because my hands were shaking, the way they shook the night I measured the 7 drops. The boy who married Rebecca at 24. I think about him with a kind of weathered tenderness now, like he was a son of mine instead of me. He thought the comfrey poultice was enough because his dad's comfrey poultice had been enough. He thought the lobelia would loosen what was tight because the lobelia had loosened his brother Eli's croup in 1998. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't careless. He loved her with everything a plain man knows how to love with. He just didn't have a word for what was happening inside her chest. And that's what the old ones knew, and didn't know, at the same time. That the land gives us most of what we need, but not all of it. Not all of it. I had to sit with that for a long time before it stopped feeling like a betrayal of my grandfathers. I tried to explain it once, to the English nurse in town, the one who'd told me about the 12 hours. I drove with my driver into her office a year after, and I tried to put it into words. How the remedies were real, how they'd worked 1,000 times, how Rebecca herself had healed a dozen women in our church with the same bottles on the same sill. The nurse listened. She was kind, but I could see it in her face. She heard Amish, and she heard didn't go to the hospital, and the rest of it just slid off her like water off oilcloth. I walked back out to the parking lot, and I stood by the truck and I thought, there is nowhere I belong all the way anymore. Not all the way in, not all the way out. And the wind was doing nothing again, the way it had the morning Rebecca passed, and I just stood there with my hat in my hand. 3 gifts. I want to name them plain. The first is the smell of comfrey leaves wilting over a kettle on a cold morning. There is nothing in the English world that smells like that, and I get to smell it every spring when the plant comes back behind the chicken coop, faithful as anything I've ever known. The second is the sound of my dad's voice teaching me, when I was 9, how to tell good mullein from the bitter kind by rubbing the leaf between thumb and finger and smelling the underside. He's 71 now, and his voice on that lesson is still in my hands every time I gather. The third is the taste of cold spring water from the pump out back, in August, when the corn is high and the day has burned everything else out of you. I am homesick for a life I am still living. That contradiction sits with me every morning. Here is the truth in one sentence. The old ways heal most things, and the new ways heal some things, and a wise man learns the difference before the wise man has to. That's what I'm building now, quietly. I keep Rebecca's bottles. I make the teas. I gather the comfrey. And I also keep a phone number in a small notebook in the kitchen drawer. The English doctor in town who will come to a plain house without asking too many questions. The bishop knows. He didn't say much. He just nodded the same way Uncle Levi nodded at the barn raising. Tradition and truth can sit at the same table. Rebecca would have wanted both chairs filled. If you grew up somewhere your grandmother's hands knew more than the doctor's, I see you. If you sat at a kitchen table while somebody you loved was being healed by leaves and lamplight, and you didn't know if it would be enough, I see you. You carry something old, and it is enough. It is enough that you carry it. Nobody has to give you permission for that. The remedies in your bones came from people who loved someone enough to stay up all night with a kettle on. That is not a small inheritance. That is most of what a life is. And to the different ones of you watching, the ones still inside the community, washing the brown bottles on the windowsill, I see you. The one who left the plain life and still finds yourself reaching for plantain leaf when a child gets a sting, I see you. The one who's English and feels something tugging you back toward your great-grandmother's recipes, I see you. The one whose grandfather knew a remedy he never wrote down and took it with him, I see you, and I'm sorry. The one who lost somebody and modern medicine couldn't catch them in time either, I see you too, brother, sister. Wherever you are in this, I see you, and you are not alone. Tell me down in the comments, what's the one remedy from your family you'd give anything to learn before it's gone for good? I read them, all of them. There is so much more I haven't said yet. There are remedies I haven't been ready to share. The ones from the Braucher, the ones from Rebecca's last spring, the night the knock came at my door, and what the English girl said when I let her in. But I'm getting closer. If you want to walk that road with me, subscribe to Dot. That's where the rest of this lives. And if a super chat or a membership feels right to you, that's you telling me these old ways are worth remembering, and that's what keeps the lamp lit on this side of the screen. The land gives us what it can. The rest is on us to learn.